The rain fell hard that evening, the kind that blurred the streetlights into a soft, trembling glow. Daniel sat in his car outside a small church in Portland, Oregon, gripping the steering wheel as if it held the answers to his prayers. He'd come here every Friday for the past 6 months. Not for confession, not for forgiveness, but for something simpler, something he thought would fill the ache of loneliness he carried for years. He prayed for a woman, a confident woman, someone strong, radiant, fearless. A woman who would stand beside him when life grew uncertain. Someone who would never doubt her worth, never stumble over her words, and never shrink in her own shadow. If only he knew that God had something else in mind. If you believe in kindness, healing, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Hopeful Stories, because sometimes the most broken souls teach us the purest kind of love. That night, as he whispered his prayer again, Daniel noticed a faint figure walking into the church just as the last hymn began. Her steps were hesitant, her hands clutched a worn notebook against her chest, and her eyes never rose from the floor. She looked as if the world had silenced her a long time ago. Yet, something about her presence drew him in, a quiet ache he couldn't name. Her name, as he would later learn, was Emily Carter. She was 28, a part-time florist, and a woman who rarely spoke more than a few words in public. Most people thought she was shy. Others assumed she was arrogant. But the truth was deeper. Emily had a severe speech disorder that made even simple words tremble and stumble out of her mouth like fragile glass. She had spent years avoiding conversations, hiding behind polite smiles, and praying that no one would notice the fear in her eyes whenever they asked her to speak. Daniel first met her officially a week later, during a church volunteer event. He was helping organize a charity dinner, and Emily had signed up to decorate the tables with flowers. She arrived quietly, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her fingers working delicately with the petals, never looking up, never interrupting anyone. While others laughed and exchanged stories, Emily remained in the background, soft, invisible, but undeniably graceful in her silence. Daniel, curious yet cautious, found himself watching her often. There was something strangely magnetic about her stillness, as if she carried oceans of unspoken words within her. He tried speaking to her once, a simple greeting, "Hi, I'm Daniel," but she only smiled faintly and nodded, her lips parting slightly before she lowered her gaze again. It was awkward, yet strangely tender. For the first time, Daniel realized that confidence didn't always roar. It sometimes trembled quietly, just trying to exist. Over the next few weeks, Daniel saw her often. Every time she was around, the air seemed softer, slower. She never demanded attention, yet somehow, she held it effortlessly. When she arranged flowers, she treated each petal like something sacred. When she helped serve food, she did so with a care that felt deeply human, gentle, humble, and kind. Daniel started finding reasons to be near her, helping with supplies, carrying boxes, even staying behind after events just to watch her clean up in that quiet, peaceful rhythm of hers. But what truly changed everything was the night of the church fundraiser. The organizer had planned a short segment where volunteers could share their personal stories, how faith, love, or kindness had changed their lives. Daniel didn't expect Emily to participate. She'd never spoken publicly before. But when her name was called, a soft murmur filled the room. Everyone looked around, surprised. Emily stood from her chair, clutching a small piece of paper, and walked toward the podium. Her hands shook. Her lips quivered. The microphone picked up the sound of her nervous breath. For a moment, Daniel's heart clenched. He wanted to stand up, to help her, to take her place. But then she began. Her words came out haltingly, broken, trembling. Every sentence took effort, every syllable a battle. And yet, no one moved. No one whispered. The entire hall sat frozen, listening to a woman who could barely speak, but somehow spoke straight to the soul. She talked about fear, about growing up mocked for stuttering, about being told she'd never be taken seriously, about how silence became her only refuge. And then, she said something that Daniel never forgot. "I thought God made a mistake with me. But maybe, he just wanted me to speak slowly so others would listen deeply. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Daniel, who had prayed for a confident woman, realized that confidence wasn't about eloquence or charm. It was about courage. It was about standing up, even when your voice shook. After that night, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about her. He found himself replaying her trembling words in his mind, the way she'd faced her greatest fear and turned it into light. A few days later, he gathered the courage to invite her for coffee. She hesitated at first, but then nodded gently. They met at a small cafe near the river, where Emily often brought her notebook to write in silence. The first few meetings were quiet. Daniel talked, and Emily mostly listened, scribbling words in her notebook whenever she couldn't express them aloud. He learned that she loved painting sunsets, writing poems she never showed anyone, and collecting wildflowers from the nearby hills. Her handwriting was soft and round, almost childlike, but every word carried meaning. She once wrote to him, "Sometimes silence is the loudest form of honesty," and he couldn't agree more. As weeks turned into months, Daniel's admiration deepened into love. Not the sudden, fiery kind, but something slower, purer. He began noticing the small things, the way she smiled when children played near the cafe window, how she paused to admire stray dogs, or how she'd whisper, "Thank you," even when people didn't hear it. She wasn't the confident woman he prayed for. She was something better, real, fragile, and strong in ways words could never define. Still, their relationship wasn't easy. Daniel's friends didn't understand. They often joked, asking how he could be with someone who barely spoke. "Don't you get bored?" one said. "You need someone lively, man," another added. But Daniel only smiled, because he'd never felt more alive than when he was with Emily. Her quietness wasn't emptiness, it was peace. It was safety. It was truth. One evening, while walking by the Willamette River, Daniel asked her what she feared the most. She took a long breath, writing slowly in her notebook, "Losing someone because I couldn't say enough." He looked at her, his eyes soft, and said gently, "You don't need to say much for me to understand you. I already do." That was the night he realized he wanted to spend his life with her. A few weeks later, Daniel planned a small picnic at the same riverside spot. It was a bright, calm afternoon, the sky a perfect blue, the air humming with spring. Emily wore a simple white dress, her hair tied loosely, sunlight kissing her cheeks. Daniel had brought sandwiches, lemonade, and a single sunflower, her favorite. They sat quietly for a while, listening to the gentle ripple of the water. Then Daniel turned to her, his heart pounding. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a grand speech. Instead, he took her trembling hands in his and said, "Emily, I used to pray for a confident woman. But now I know, confidence isn't loud. It's this. It's you. You've taught me that love doesn't need perfect words. It just needs a willing heart. So if you'll let me, I want to be the man who listens to your silence forever." Tears filled her eyes. Her lips quivered as she tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. So she wrote instead, one simple line, "Yes, with all my heart." They married 6 months later in that same small church where they first met. The aisles were lined with wildflowers, the air filled with quiet joy. When it came time for Emily to say her vows, everyone held their breath. She stood there, hands shaking, her voice fragile yet determined. "I may not speak perfectly," she said, pausing to steady herself, "but I promise to love perfectly." It was short, it was trembling, and it was the most beautiful vow anyone had ever heard. Years passed. Daniel and Emily built a life full of little moments, painting on Sundays, planting flowers in their backyard, watching the rain fall through their window, just like that first night. Emily started a small online flower shop called Silent Blooms, where she wrote short notes with every bouquet she sent, simple messages of hope, healing, and quiet strength. People all over the country began following her page, inspired by the woman who once could barely speak but now used her voice, however soft, to change lives. Daniel often thought back to that lonely night in his car when he prayed for a confident woman. He smiled now, Realizing that God hadn't ignored his prayer, he had answered it differently. He had sent him someone confident enough to be vulnerable, strong enough to be soft, and brave enough to keep speaking even when her words faltered. Because true confidence isn't about how loud you speak. It's about speaking anyway, even when your voice shakes. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Hopeful Stories. Let's spread light, kindness, and love, one story at a time. Speech Balloon special request. Before you go, please comment below. What does confidence mean to you? Your words might inspire someone who needs them today. As the sun set behind their little home, Emily sat by the window, her head resting on Daniel's shoulder. The world outside was quiet, painted in shades of gold and pink. She whispered, almost inaudible, "Thank you for hearing me," even when I couldn't speak. Daniel smiled, kissed her forehead, and whispered back, "You never needed words, Emily. You were always heard." And in that moment, the silence spoke louder than anything else ever could.